Are you the friend who's always being asked for health advice? Now imagine turning that passion into a fulfilling career with our Become a Nutrition Coach program. Step into a world where your enthusiasm for wellness becomes the heart of your own thriving business. With me as your professor and guide and coach on our user-friendly digital platform, you can learn from anywhere at your very own pace. It's perfect for your busy life. Envision empowering others to live their healthiest lives, all while growing a career you love. You're not just gaining a certification here, you're joining a community of like-minded professionals ready to support and celebrate with you every step of the way. So what are you waiting for? It's time to nourish your future and help change lives, including your own. Head over to nutritiouslife.com/BNC for a free class and a sneak peek of the program. Your journey to becoming a nutrition coach begins now. How many of you think about your liver health? I think some of us think about it in terms of something like, I've been beating up my liver drinking too much recently. But we don't really think about it in the same way that we may think about our heart health or our brain health. But guess what? We should. And this is why I am so happy that you're here for today's episode. So, hello everyone. Welcome back to the Living a Nutritious Life podcast. In today's episode, we're talking, well, I clearly gave it away, all about the liver. I'm joined by experts, registered dietitian Kristin Kirkpatrick and Dr. Ibrahim Hanouneh. Kristin is a best-selling author and an MSRD and president and CEO of KAK Nutrition Consulting. She's also a dietitian with the Department of Wellness and Preventive Medicine at Cleveland Clinic. Dr. Hanouneh completed his internal medicine residency and gastroenterology and hepatology fellowship training at the Cleveland Clinic and served on the liver faculty at the Cleveland Clinic and the Mayo Clinic. And their full bios are in the show notes, so check them out. They are both super impressive. In this episode, we delve deep into the silent epidemic of fatty liver disease. Diet and lifestyle modifications are the only way to treat and reverse fatty liver disease, which affects, get this, 1 in 4 people in the US. We talk about why early screening is vital, and we talk about the collaboration necessary between dietitians and physicians when it comes to liver disease. And we also talk about Kristin and Dr. Hanouneh's new book, Regenerative Health: Discover Your Metabolic Type and Renew Your Liver for Life. In the book, they go through 4 main metabolic profiles and offer customized eating and lifestyle plans to put people on a path to better health. And guess what? We discuss all of that on today's podcast. Finally, we also discuss what should we all be eating for a healthy liver. Guess what, friends? You're going to be very happy to hear that chocolate and coffee make that list, but you're going to need to keep listening to hear the rest. So let's do this. And don't forget, please rate, review, and share if you love this podcast. Welcome to Living a Nutritious Life. I'm Keri Glassman, a celebrity registered dietitian nutritionist. Join me every Tuesday on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms as I bring in some heavy hitters to share the latest in nutrition and wellness science. We dive deep into food, sleep, stress, relationships, and so much more. Your weekly guide to a happier, healthier, more nutritious life. Hello, hello, Ibrahim and Kristin. I am so beyond excited to have you both here today and to talk to both of you about your latest book, because we don't talk about the liver enough. So welcome to the Living a Nutritious Life podcast. And we are going to be all about liver today, which I am so excited about. So first of all, congrats on your latest book. And for everyone out there listening, the book is Regenerative Health: Discover Your Metabolic Type and Renew Your Liver for Life. And as I was just saying, we don't talk about the liver enough. No. And as I learned in school when I became a registered dietitian, the liver is really important. It does a lot of things. I think it has it has at least over 300 roles, if not, maybe we've probably even learned of more by now, including metabolizing food, removing toxins from our blood. I mean, it's important, right?
So important. I'll let Ibrahim kind of go into the science of it. But you're right, Keri. I feel like when I was in dietetic school, I feel like I had like maybe 5 paragraphs on the liver, and it was very specific to the patient that had a liver disease.
Yes.
It wasn't really preventative in nature by any means. It wasn't like, hey, here's what we do for our liver to make sure that yes, you are absorbing all your vitamins and minerals and your blood clotting is working and every single metabolic mediator that we have, blood sugar management. It was more preventative. It was more proactive. It was more reactive and not proactive. So yeah, I'm happy that you brought that up as our first point.
Well, and it's certainly, not only was it reactive, but even if you were learning just the basic functions of the liver, and that the liver stores glucose as glycogen, and sorry, everyone listening out there that doesn't know what that is, this is a little dietetics talk for you. But anyway, even if you learned the basic physiology of the liver and the basic functions that it did, and you weren't even talking about disease, you certainly were not talking about maximizing the liver for optimal health.
Right.
And I think that's something that's we've learned so much more about. And there's so many things we can do to, as you know, this is a big word we use on this podcast a lot. It's living optimally. How do we live optimally? How do we maximize our health so we're not just living longer, but we're also living longer better? And so that's one of the reasons that I'm really fascinated by your book, is because you're really talking about liver health, again, like you were just saying, not in a reactive way, not in you've really damaged your liver through, alcohol or medications or whatever else, but how can you actually maximize and improve the health of it to improve your overall health? By there's so many things we can do on a daily basis to do that too. So anyway, I'm really excited about all that. So so why don't we start with Ibrahim? Can you give us a little just liver 101, because I think, again, some people might know that the liver, it has something to do with, we need it for alcohol detoxification. I think some people might think that might be all they know about it. Some people, again, might know that it stores glucose as glycogen. Other people know, that the liver processes the blood and breaks it down and creates nutrients, maybe if they have a little more knowledge of the physiology of the liver. But why don't you give us a little liver 101, just because, again, I think that a lot of people just aren't familiar with it the way they may be with the heart or the GI tract.
Sure. No, you're raising really good points, Keri. I call the liver the forgotten organ, because to your point, we talk about everything and we forget about the liver. And quite honestly, it turns out if you get liver disease, like fatty liver disease, for example, clearly that's may lead to liver problem, but also lead to problem outside the liver. Because when your liver is in trouble, that's going to affect other system. For example, patients with fatty liver disease are at higher risk to get heart attack and strokes. Patients with fatty liver disease are at high risk to get cancer, not just liver cancer, but even cancer outside the liver. So yes, I call it the forgotten organ. And here's a fact. Fatty liver disease, which as the name implies is fat in the liver associated with diabetes and metabolic syndrome, affects 25% of the world. Just think about that number for a second. 1 in 4 people have fatty liver disease. Very, very, very common.
Before you go on with that, I want to know, of that 25%, how many people know they have fatty liver disease?
Oh, very few. So that's the thing. Really, I think there is certainly room for improvement to screen patients who have risk factor for fatty liver disease, because the vast majority of them didn't know. I can cite quick a study done in San Diego where they went to diabetes clinic. And those patients were coming to their clinic to get tested for diabetes and get diabetes treated. And they have no history of liver disease, no symptoms of liver disease, never being told that they have liver disease. And they said in that study, we're going to screen everybody for fatty liver. 65% of them had fatty liver disease.
Wow.
65%.
Wow.
And the vast majority of them didn't know.
Yeah. So most people out there are walking around, or a large percentage of people out there are walking around with fatty liver disease. And the large percentage of those people walking around with fatty liver disease don't even know they have it.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. And that's the other thing, to your point earlier, there is stigma of liver disease. So as soon as you say is like, well, do you know that you may have fatty liver disease? My patients comes in and say, no, wait a second. I've never been a heavy drinker.
Right.
There is stigma of liver disease. As soon as you say liver, the next thing comes to your mind would be heavy drinking. But we are talking here about a completely different disease that happened because of diabetes, a certain diet, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, those kind of risk factors.
So what happens? So when you have fatty liver disease, you started saying how it can affect the rest of, other systems in your body. So what are the most common things you see in patients with fatty liver disease?
Certainly starting with the liver, if you have fatty liver disease, that puts you at increased risk to get scarring tissue of the liver, inflammation of the liver, scarring tissue, which can potentially lead to cirrhosis, which is by far now the most common indication for liver transplantation in the country, meaning most patients in the United States get liver transplantation because of fatty liver, not because of drinking or hepatitis C, it's because of fatty liver. And it's certainly increased risk of liver cancer. But like we said earlier, not just the liver, because the liver acts as a security gate, things come to your body, has to stop, filtered by the liver, like we said earlier, before they get in. So when your liver is overloaded with fat, that security gate is broken and some of the bad guys get in. And when they build up, it may affect other systems. And that's why, like we said earlier, fatty liver disease puts you at increased risk of heart attack, stroke, and cancer in general.
Right. No, right. I understand that. But I'm saying, what are some signs that you might have it? I guess that's what I'm asking, what are signs for people out there that might not know they have fatty liver disease? What might they be feeling or seeing or in the way, in their everyday life?
Well, believe it or not, fatty liver disease is a silent disease. That's why we called it in the book, the silent epidemic. So to answer your question, the vast majority of patients with fatty liver disease, they have no symptoms. Right. Or they may have very vague symptoms. For example, fatigue, very non-specific symptoms.
I mean, that could be from anything.
Sure.
You could be tired for a million different reasons, which most people, or even just poor sleep, which we know obviously makes you tired. But I mean, there could be a plethora of reasons that make you tired, right?
Right. Yeah. And fatty liver disease doesn't lead to real symptoms, like specific symptoms to the liver, until unfortunately it's too late in the game, when you already have a lot of damage in your liver and you don't want to wait that long. That's why kind of we encourage screening for fatty liver disease. Even if you don't have symptoms, look for it earlier, when you have risk factors.
Right. Okay. Great. That's super, super helpful for people. So I want to ask you a question, because I know you've done a lot of research together. So can you tell us a little bit about the research that you've done together, even just your story? How did you come to work together? And what is the research you've been doing? What led you to write this book? I know you've written another book together, so I'm sure obviously this one came from that one, but give us a little background here.
So I've been a dietitian at Cleveland Clinic for 21 years at this point in integrative medicine. And I had all these patients that would show up, and literally what would come out of their mouth was, hey, I saw my primary care physician. I was told that my BMI is too high, or I'm obese, and my blood sugar is a little wacky, and I probably have something called fatty liver. And then you would help me kind of reverse this. Here I am. Right.
Right.
And so
we got it.
Okay. So what I realized really early on was that, number one, there were no drugs. So these patients came in, they were told they have fatty liver. Now, maybe this was before even ultrasound. They probably had some liver enzymes that were off. And so that's probably what pushed their physician to send them to me. But there was no pharmacological approach to being able to manage this condition. So of course the approach is go see the dietitian. There was no manual, there was no guide, nothing. So when this started occurring back in 2015, I partnered up with our hepatology group at Cleveland Clinic. Ibrahim was the person that I connected with. And I said, I really think we need to write the guide because it doesn't exist. So there exist a million guides for heart disease, for better brain health, for a million guides, right? You can go to so many people, but there is nothing for fatty liver disease. And I'm having all these patients. So Ibrahim was gracious enough to allow me to shadow him for a long time. And we decided to write the first book, which was basically just a general synopsis. Here's what the liver does. Here's fatty liver disease. Here's some general ideas of how to reverse it. But that's how he and I got together, was really our Cleveland Clinic connection.
I love that story. And one thing about that story that I really love is that the doctors were sending those patients to you, though, even though there wasn't the pharmacological approach. But I love that they sent them right to you, because oftentimes they say, yeah, there's nothing we can really do. And they don't always get sent to a dietitian to work on it in other ways. So not always, right? Ibrahim, I'm sure you send a lot of patients to dietitians, but I'm just saying sometimes that happens where there's not much you can do, right? There is, because there wasn't the guide. It wasn't like they knew, okay, the dietitian will take you through this protocol. If it wasn't there, I'm just happy that they were sending them to you, and look where it led you to create this guide with Ibrahim. So I love it. It's amazing.
And quite honestly, this is a perfect disease where you need collaboration between the physician and the dietitian. I mean, this is a disease where a wise man once said, let the food be your medicine. There's no medicine to treat fatty liver disease. The treatment is food. And we physicians are not really good at going deep dive into diet. So that's, I think, the secrets of our collaboration, the power of our collaboration comes from this kind of, dietitian physician, to tackle fatty liver.
I love it. And collaboration is always a great thing. And this is a really beautiful collaboration. So it's really great. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, I know in the book, which just came out a couple weeks ago, everyone, mid-February it came out. So if you have not got your hands on it, you need to. And in the show notes, there'll be a link to where you can just go purchase it right now as you are listening. But in the book, you talk about the different metabolic types. Can you talk about that? Because you talk about these 4 different metabolic types and how to predict, prevent, and treat liver disease according to your type. So can you go through at least a couple of them? You don't have to give it all away, but go through a couple of them for us.
So really, what really drove us to create the metabolic types was the fact that both Ibrahim and I had seen patients that were sent to us and were identified as perhaps being not healthy because of a BMI number. So we talked a lot about research, and through our research, we really realized that BMI is just a horrible assessment of health.
I mean, absolutely. They're going to it's going to be done away with soon, right? I mean, BMI is kind of going out.
Let's hope. I mean, there was a article that came out today. I just read it this morning. So it's I'm missing what journal it was in, but it was a pediatric population really assessing how the waist to hip ratio was much better than BMI. And it's yes, of course.
We've been saying that.
Right? A better assessment. So what we wanted to do was, number one, take away this idea that, hey, if your BMI is high, then you're at risk for fatty liver and you're unhealthy. But those are not necessarily true statements. What is a true statement, and Ibrahim can get into this, we've changed the nomenclature from looking at non-alcoholic fatty liver disease to really looking at the metabolic side of fatty liver disease. This is really formed by metabolic indicators. So that was the second thing we looked at. We said, okay, so we have to look at waist circumference. So, over 35 for a female, over 40 for a male. And then we have to look at, is your waist circumference in line with poor metabolic numbers? So do you have any of the components of metabolic syndrome? Do you have high blood pressure, low HDL, high lipid, high triglycerides, insulin resistance, high hemoglobin A1C? So do you have those in connection with looking at waist circumference? So for example, what we found is that individuals that had a normal waist circumference, but had poor metabolic numbers, so skinny fat, if you will. So this is the skinny fat individuals. Their numbers are not well, but their waist is just not indicating any issue. They're much more at risk than someone who has normal metabolic numbers, but their waist circumference might be a little bit high.
Okay.
Right. So that was kind of the thought process behind the metabolic types. Obviously, if your waist circumference is high and your metabolic numbers are off, you are going to have the most aggressive treatment, if we could use the word aggressive. But we're going to use that type of treatment to help to reverse the condition, because you've got both things going on versus just one. So we really wanted to pinpoint how important it was that we can't identify BMI or the scale. We don't like the scale either. So the scale and BMI are just not good indicators of health.
Right.
Metabolic numbers.
Totally agree with that. Across, not just as it relates to liver, but in general.
Right. So for example, so we've got and we named them. So we named the fine tuner would be someone whose metabolic numbers are normal, but their waist circumference is too high. So they got to change a few things, but really their metabolic numbers are fine. For someone who is like the preventer, for example, that was one of our types. That's someone normal waist circumference, normal metabolic profile. So maybe what's going on with that population is you have some genetics that are going on. So Ibrahim and I pulled some research looking at what happens when your mom had gestational diabetes, when your mom maybe had fatty liver, when her diet was poor. What's the risk to you once you're born and go through life of having fatty liver disease? It's actually greater than the general population. So that would be someone who has the genetic risk factor, but maybe nothing is showing up in terms of metabolic numbers, but they still have to think about it. They can't be one of those people that say, oh, I never think about my liver. Why would I think about my liver? They need to think about their liver.
And so many people don't think about their liver. They know, oh, heart disease is in my family, cancer's in my family, neuronal degeneration is in my family. People think about that. They think about brain health a lot, heart health a lot. They just don't, at least from the people that I've talked to over all of these years of doing what I'm doing. You don't hear liver come up until, like you said, Ibrahim, it's generally too late.
Right. And I think to Abraham's point about the asymptomatic nature of this disease, one of the things I tell my patients is that the liver can take such a beating. I mean, you can just wear it down. And it's not until it gets to the end where it's like, you know what, I'm done. I'm done. And that's when you get the symptoms. So we just it's very different from the heart. You start beating the heart, you're going to get a symptom pretty quickly. That's occurring. So that's the thing. And I think, this might be jumping ahead, but I think that's the main concern of what we're seeing in the data in terms of how young some of these patients are being diagnosed. I mean, we're seeing as young as 8 years old. So those individuals have time. They have time on their side. They might finally get to cirrhosis at 30 or 40 if they don't change anything. So another concern.
Why are you seeing it in patients so young? Has that changed over the years, or are you just did we not know before?
Well, I think it parallels the increase in insulin resistance and obesity. So I think central obesity, right? So if we focus on the waist circumference, so I think from that perspective, Ibrahim could probably speak to why they're being diagnosed more. But I think as we see an increase in type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance, we will continue to see increases in fatty liver as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's what I would have guessed.
Yeah, I was going to say, that, fatty liver disease is relatively new disease. It was first described in 1980. So it's a relatively new disease. So there is certainly increased awareness among physicians to look for it, if you will. That's possibly part of the reason why we are finding fatty liver more often. But certainly I echo what Kristin said, because of increase in insulin resistance and increased sugar intake and carbs intake, which led to more obesity and central obesity in particular. So there have been an increase in the prevalence of fatty liver disease in general population, including children and adolescents.
It's just another thing that has come to be because of our terrible diets in this country, right? I mean, unfortunately. But the good part of all of this is that there is so much you can do through diet to make changes. So actually, let's talk about that a little bit. And I feel like I'm jumping ahead now into one of my favorite parts of the book, because I still have a lot of other questions for you. But you talk about the 12 liver-friendly foods to always have on hand. I want to take a moment to tell you about our podcast sponsor, which I'm a super fan of. In today's fast-paced, go-go-go world, it's so easy to get overwhelmed and lose focus, especially when you're trying to accomplish critical tasks that require a sharp mind. If you're looking for a way to support your brain health and stay on top of your game, if you know me at all, you know I'm always looking to do that. Well, then you want to know about cognizant acetylcholine. This nutrient helps support brain function, and it plays a vital role in nourishing and protecting brain cells. Cognizant acetylcholine can help support focus, memory, and attention, promote cognitive performance, and support overall brain health. It's also known for its ability to support brain energy and is backed by numerous studies that show its effectiveness. Whether you're a student, a busy professional, a multitasking parent, or anyone looking to optimize mental clarity and sharpness, adding cognizant acetylcholine to your daily routine can help you achieve those goals and support your brain for the future. It can be found in many different products, including chewables, gummies, beverages, and even cold brew coffee. Visit cognizant.com for exactly where to find this ingredient, and don't forget to look for Cognizant on the label. But you talk about the 12 liver-friendly foods to always have on hand. And I want to get into that because I really like giving people actionable tips, things that they can, while they're listening to this right now, put into practice to help, to help improve their lives and their overall health. So let's talk about some of those foods and why they are liver-friendly foods.
Yeah. So I guess let's start with one that I think is somewhat surprising. Maybe, I don't know if using the word controversial in some populations might be correct, but it's probably correct. But coffee. So if you look.
I love coffee. I'm all about coffee. I always say coffee comes in all different shapes and sizes. Coffee. No, coffee comes in many different types of forms. You can really mess up a coffee and make it very unhealthy, but you can also have a really healthy coffee and get some of those antioxidants, and it's not all bad. So I'm with you with coffee.
Yeah. So I just think like coffee has so many bioactive compounds. If we look at the data, what we know is that there's over a dozen studies that link coffee consumption to better liver health and the reversal of fibrosis within fatty liver disease. So, and you're absolutely right, Keri, like you can take coffee and completely ruin it. You can butcher it. But if you have coffee in its purest form and you buy it from, places that you make sure that has very high antioxidant capacity, that can be such a winner. I mean, coffee ultimately comes from a plant, and we know that you've got phytonutrients and bioactive compounds coming from every plant. So coffee is within that same realm.
I have to interrupt you while we're talking about coffee because I love hearing health benefits of coffee because I am a big coffee drinker. Yes. How do you take your coffee?
So I go back and forth. This is interesting. And I don't know why I go back and forth, but I will do
this is a side note, everyone. I'm just curious. How
so in the morning, I make a cappuccino with nut pods.
Okay.
Right? Unsweetened nut pod, which I love. So either coconut milk or almond milk that doesn't have any sugar. But I don't know why in the afternoon, I just take it black.
Okay. So I think that's common to have like an afternoon coffee that's a little different if you drink it in the afternoon. Okay.
And I'm obsessed with coffee. I mean, one of the things I think we talk about briefly in the book is I think we do delve into the CYP1A2 gene. So from a nutrigenomic standpoint, there is a genotype that's associated with slower metabolism of caffeine.
Yes.
So the reason we go into that is not to say, well, hey, none of you guys can have coffee. That's not the case. We definitely see studies looking both at caffeinated and decaffeinated coffee as beneficial to the liver. So even if you have the CYP1A2 genotyping, you can still enjoy coffee. You might just have to go with a decaf after your first cup during the morning.
Okay. Yeah. But you can still reap some of the benefits.
Still get the benefits because that's what we see in the studies. We see benefit to decaf. We see benefit to caffeinated. Okay. So the question is it the bean or the caffeine? And there could be a combination of two, just depending on what the research is doing at that point, right? Along the same lines, if we're staying with plants, dark chocolates. So that was another thing that we talked about and some of the benefits to dark chocolate. And this is going a little bit off from specific to the liver, but we talk about the importance of managing mental health. So there's so many studies on dark chocolate, flavonoids, and looking at how it reduces subjective stress and depression scores in individuals. So again, like trying to think about if you're looking for an actionable item to my patients, I'm always saying, instead of having that comfort food, maybe something that's ultra processed, how about a few pieces of dark chocolate?
Right. Something where you can satisfy that sweet tooth. It can feel like an indulgence, but you're also actually doing something good for you. And that's what I always call eating empowered. That food is working for you versus against you. And there's many foods that can work for you that are also feel indulgent and you truly enjoy, like your morning coffee, like your little chocolate treat. I totally agree with you there. I love that. Okay. So we've got coffee, we've got chocolate. Let's keep going. I'm loving these liver foods.
Okay. Extra virgin olive oil is one that we have plenty of studies on. I had a patient yesterday say to me, she actually sent me an email and she's like, I know you recommended 3 to 5 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil a day. I'm really struggling with getting it in, and maybe I'm just not having enough cooking or vegetables or whatever. So I went onto Instagram yesterday and I was like, this is 3 tablespoons of olive oil. It was in a little glass and I downed it. So you could just drink it. You could drink it. You have so many.
Okay, so I thought you were going in a different direction there. I thought you were going to say, this is how much it is. Just keep it in your kitchen. Pour a little here, pour a little there, get through it by the end of the day. That's where I thought you were going with that. I did not think you were going with the taking a shot of olive oil. No. But that's okay too. All right.
Take a shot of olive oil, right? So, and then
quality, really good quality though, right?
Good quality, right? And so that's the other thing I talked about. Like, one of the things was how do we find a good quality olive oil? What is the importance of looking at things like harvest date, the bottle that the olive oil comes in, the source, the origin. So all of those things are really important. So extra virgin olive oil is another one. Plenty of studies looking at that. Berries. So berries was another component that we felt was really important. Obviously, berries are like powerful on many levels, right? I mean, you look at berries and reduction of cancer risk, things like that. But I think the point we wanted to make with berries is just getting multiple colors. So I don't know about you, Keri, but my patients will sometimes come to me and say, like, I can't have 7 fruits and vegetables a day. That's like, who has that kind of time? Are you out of your mind? But then I just say, like, okay, let's take the concept of servings out and let's just look at color. Can you get 7 colors in today? And if you can get 7 colors in, you're going to get the nutrients that come along with those different colors.
With the variety. Right. And I also think people sometimes don't realize how small an actual serving, if you're using the standard serving guidelines, they're small. That when they're having their berries, they're probably they don't even realize. I always say you're probably having 2 servings and you don't even realize it. Right. So that's something else I like to point out. And I love the foods that you're talking about because they're also so beneficial to just overall health, right? And I often say that. I say what's good for the heart is good for the brain, and now I'm going to say is good for the liver, right? It's like what's good. They're all like, and for different reasons, right? So and I'm sure, Kristin, you talk about this with your patients too. It's where's the motivating factor coming from, and that's what you want to point to. Like berries for your patient. It might be because they've got fatty liver disease. Here's what it's doing for you. But for someone else, it might be to prevent Alzheimer's. But these foods, I love you're pointing out these foods that have such a large variety of benefits because that motivating factor to eat them and incorporate them into your diet is going to be different for everyone. And I love that there's so many people out there that are, like you said, 25% of the population that are suffering with fatty liver disease. These are the foods that you probably even have on hand. And these foods can be working for you. It's like, go the extra mile, incorporate them into your diet on a daily basis. Right. Okay. I love these. Let's keep hearing some more.
Well, and that's a great point, Keri, that you bring up, right? We also wanted the foods, like, I didn't want to come out and say, hey, there's some great studies on sea moss gel.
Right.
And then you're going to have to figure out where to get it. How do I actually put it in my... And sea moss gel, great benefits to it. We have plenty of data, but it's not necessarily like what all of my patients can get.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So
it has to be accessible. Yeah. It has to be accessible. And it also has to be something, actionable that people can do. If there is some food that maybe people have access to, but it takes 5 hours to prepare. I can't even think of what that food might be right now, but I'm just saying if it's something like that, then that's also not necessarily actionable. It's not realistic for people to put into practice. Everything that you've just mentioned so far is pretty easy to incorporate into your daily life.
Right. And you can get it in different forms, right? So even if we're talking about berries, like, you don't have to get fresh berries. I mean, you and I know that frozen berries are frozen at peak ripeness. They're often much more nutrient dense versus, like, if you want to get a blueberry in New York City in February, don't go fresh. You know how long it took for that berry to travel from someplace where it actually was grown? Go for frozen, because from a seasonal perspective, it might have more nutrient density. So, we go into that too. Like, what are some variations on how you can do this? Green tea was another one that we talked about. I mean, any tea will give benefits, but green tea had the most studies in terms of the family of teas, in terms of fibrosis, fatty liver disease. And then there were some like specific ones. So looking at things like kiwi fruit, there were some specific studies on kiwi. There were some specific studies looking at nuts and seeds, looking at turmeric. So, again, like what I was trying to really draw into from my patient base was, I want you to look at what your current snacks and meals are and just figure out how you would add these in.
And I love that add in.
Yeah.
Add in as opposed to overthinking that, because that's easier. It's an easier switch for people. That's an easier thing, I think, for people to take action on, is adding in versus like taking out. And then generally, right, those unhealthier foods just sort of move their way off the plate or out of the cup because they're adding in the healthier food. So
adding in the healthier foods, feeling better. I mean, when you're eating better, you have more energy. So, you have kind of these like secondary symptoms that encourage you to maybe take another step, encourage you to say, oh, I do want to hear about sea moss, or I do want to eat more algae because it's at that place. But I think the importance, and this is like really pinnacle in integrative medicine, is meeting the patient where they are.
100%. Totally with you. Yep.
Right. I mean, some of my patients will come in and say, well, I have a perfect diet, but my doctor told me to see you. And my answer is always like, you do? I don't have a perfect diet. How do you do that? Right. Yeah. Because I'm learning every day of things that I can improve.
Right.
No perfect diet. And there's no one size fits all. So we really wanted to embrace the readers of the book, their personal, their cultural, and their religious preferences. Because if those things are not followed, it doesn't matter what plan you try and follow, you will not stay with it longer than 18 months. So that was a really important factor to us. And obviously, taking away some of those things, and we don't have to get into the weeds of this, but like sometimes it's hard to take away sugar. There's addictive properties to it. So it's not always reasonable to tell someone like, just have less sugar. Why can't you just have less sugar? Right? It's not always the case. It's not easy.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, the better someone feels, the next, like they want to take that next step. So you said like you're not going to mention sea moss gel right away, but for that person that's incorporated all of those foods that you mentioned every single day, and they're feeling great and doing great, and they say, hey, I want to be even more proactive. What can I do? That's the person that then you can say, well, hey, sea moss gel or whatever the next thing is. So I like that. Once you start feeling better. So it's the same thing with sugar. You might not take that sugar away for someone. That might be too dramatic of a step for someone. But if they start adding in, let's say, frozen wild blueberries into a smoothie every morning, they start feeling better. And then they do something else. Well, then they might say, you know what, I actually am craving less sugar, and it's easier to make those changes. So I love your approach, because it feels very tangible and actionable to people, and to the large majority of people out there, which is important because, like you said, a huge percentage of people have fatty liver disease. So, So I want to talk a little bit about something that I've always found a little fascinating, and I don't think people know too much about. And again, I personally have found it to be a fascinating topic. So white fat versus brown fat, because I know you talk about that in the book. I think some people do know that white fat is really that adipose tissue, what we think of when we think of fat on our bodies. It has these large, this is more, I know you both know this. This is for our listeners out there. White fat has like the large lipid droplets, and it's really inactive. Brown fat is known for having smaller lipid droplets, and it's got its own mitochondria, which, just for everybody out there that doesn't remember what mitochondria is, a little 7th grade science class refresher here. Mitochondria are the energy producing organelles of the cells. So why does this matter? Why is this a topic in the book? How does this relate to a healthy liver? Talk to us about that.
Brown fat is, like you said, Keri, is metabolically active, and we like to, we like to convert white fat, if possible, to have more brown fat on board to burn the fat in your liver and prevent fatty liver disease. And that goes back to why one size doesn't fit all, and why we look at fatty liver from metabolic syndrome standpoint. That's why they changed the name of fatty liver disease into metabolically associated fatty liver disease, believe it or not. Because it's a disease associated with metabolic syndrome. If you do have white fat, which is metabolically inactive, right, you are more susceptible to get fatty liver. You're more susceptible for that fat to break down and develop inflammation, and then eventually scarring tissue, fibrosis, which can potentially lead to liver cirrhosis and liver cancer. Mm-hmm. If you have a brown fat on board that's metabolically active, that's going to burn things out, burn the calories out, less likely, even if you do have a little bit of fat in your liver, it's less likely to develop inflammation and scarring and bad outcome, quite frankly. More of brown fat.
So first of all, did I describe brown and white fat properly? Was that a good description of brown and white fat? Okay. Because I always found it kind of interesting, and we don't talk about it that often, but I find it interesting. But anyway, okay, so this might be a silly question, but as you just said that, you can tell the type of fat on the liver, what it is, brown or white fat?
Quite honestly, you can tell from the metabolic type. So you would expect the fatty liver to be, or the fat to be brown fat if your patient is metabolically active. In other words, in our group, if it's metabolically healthy, doesn't have metabolic risk factors. But you can tell, just by looking at the ultrasound or taking pictures, if it's brown or
the way you said that at first, I was like, wait, can you actually tell the exact type of fat on the liver?
Good question.
I did not know that.
I love it. My percentage of brown fat versus, white fat.
Well, and what can you do? What can you do to turn your white fat into brown fat? How can you take your white fat and make it more or how can you do that? How can you make your white fat more metabolically active and more like brown fat?
By reversing the metabolic risk factors, if you will. In the simple words, if you do have type 2 diabetes and you get type 2 diabetes under better control, you are converting more of the white fat into brown fat. If you follow the diet that Kristin was talking about, low carb diet, low sugar diet, you are becoming gradually metabolically more active, meaning, white fat becoming more of brown fat. And remember, the liver has great capacity to regenerate. That's what's really fascinating about the liver. When we do live donor liver transplant, you take a piece of a liver from a loved one and you give it to a patient who needs liver transplant. And if you scan the donor and the recipients, only few weeks after the surgery, the liver in both donor and recipients is back to the original size. It's almost like a science fiction. And there is no other organ in the body that does this except the liver. It tells you volume about the capacity of regeneration, which can be translated into our disease, fatty liver disease. If you find fatty liver disease early and get metabolically active, you will reverse it and regenerate the damage, and you live happily ever after.
Wow. And so you're bringing me back. I'm getting a little nostalgic now for my days at NYU Langone, as when I was in my dietetic internship on the transplant floor, which I spent a good amount of time on. And I do remember always finding that to be one of the most fascinating parts of just the liver and the body in general. I just found that so fascinating that the liver could regenerate like that.
Yeah, indeed.
Super fascinating. Okay. So I know you talk about the fatty liver disease being a silent epidemic. I'm kind of going back to what we were talking about in the beginning here. And there's certain symptoms like osteoporosis, brain fog, PCOS, and others. So what do you like someone out there that's having brain fog, someone out there that has PCOS, like what should they do? Like, because I think sometimes people out there might say, wow, do I have fatty liver? And they're going to their doctor this week. They're going for a checkup. Like what questions should they ask?
Yeah, I would say if you do have risk factor for fatty liver disease, specifically type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, family history of fatty liver disease, obstructive sleep apnea, polycystic ovarian syndrome, etc. And you go see your doctor for annual physical, make sure you get screened for fatty liver. How do you get screened? It's pretty simple. Blood test, and it's routine blood test, really can be done with routine blood test during annual physical, liver function test, that's what we call them, or complete metabolic panel. And then and some sort of imaging of the liver, picture of the liver with ultrasound or another kind of ultrasound-like machine called FibroScan. They're all non-invasive, as you guys know, and kind of relatively cheap. And you'll be able to find out if you have fatty liver disease or not. I'm not advocating everybody to be screened for fatty liver, but certainly if you do have the risk factors we mentioned.
Right, exactly. Because I just think sometimes people, they hear this and they think, well, maybe that's why I have this, or maybe that's why I have brain fog. And I want to know more, but then they don't even know, they don't know necessarily what to ask or to ask their doctor. And their doctor sometimes might say, oh, you're fine. You might not have this if it's not their area of expertise or if they don't see a lot of this. So I always like people to be able to, be armed when they're going in with all of like the right questions to ask and things. So that was really helpful. Thank you. This was amazing. I'm so excited for everyone out there to get your book because again, I think that learning more about liver health is so super important for all the reasons you mentioned. And I love that, again, it's so actionable. There's so many things tips and foods that you put into the book that people can take immediate action on and can really regenerate their liver. They can improve their health. They can change, and there's nothing else there's nothing else they can do. They can't go and just take a medication. It's not like you said. So we have to take hold of our health through our diet as when it comes to the liver. So I think this is going to be a really powerful book. I'm excited for so many people to get their hands on it. One last question for both of you. I'll start with you, Ibrahim. How do you live your most nutritious life? What do you do to sort of ignite that nutritious life?
I like to stick with a diet that I like. It's certainly going to be a healthy diet, but it's kind of, I enjoy and I'd be able to stick to it. I reference a study that study all kind of diets, to treat fatty liver disease, Mediterranean diet, low carb diet, keto diet, low fat diet, etc. And it turns out really the best diet for you is the healthy diet that you'll be able to stick to. So I feel that's what's keep me going. I like to treat myself every now and then, which is okay, to treat yourself on a weekend, etc. But maybe, watch what you eat more carefully during the weekdays.
I like that, it really makes sense. Do what you can do consistently and something that you're going to stick with. Don't try to do something that's so hardcore that you're going to do it for 3 days and then say, forget that. So I like that. All right. How about you, Kristin?
I always like to tell my patients that I think sometimes they're surprised to hear this from a dietitian because people have this idea of what a dietitian's diet is and, what we do on a day-to-day basis. And all we do is eat veggies. But I always say it's okay to have the cookie. And what I mean when I say it's okay to have the cookie is that when you look at areas, like you look at the blue zones, you look at longevity studies, it is what we do the majority of the time that makes the difference in terms of our health. So what I see with a lot of my patients and what I try and do myself or try not to do myself is they'll have a cookie and they'll come in and Tuesday the first thing out of their mouth was, I had a cookie over the weekend. I was so good. And then I screwed everything up.
Yep.
And I think we need to get over this idea that we need to be perfect with diet every day of the week and every single solitary minute of those days. We don't need to be perfect. We need to be really good 80% of the time. And that we know can lead to better health overall. So I think that when we look at deprivation, when we look at what we can't have, when we refer to food as bad, those all kind of factor in with the spiral of never being able to find a dietary pattern, not a dietary pattern that makes sense for us because we're constantly chasing what we couldn't achieve. So I think like that's the main point I always want to make people. If you love a cookie, have a cookie. Right. Yes, it's going to be better if you make it yourself versus an ultra processed cookie. No doubt. But you're not bad if you have the cookie. Just don't have the cookie every day.
Absolutely. Right. It's funny. I ask people, I like that because I always ask people, what are your favorite foods? What are your greatest indulgences? What are the things you love the most? If they were healthy, you'd eat them every day. And they'll say something like, okay, this cheesecake, my grandmother's cheesecake. And I say, well, when do you have that? They say, well, every year on Christmas we have it. I'm like, okay, so by the way, have that cheesecake every year on Christmas, whatever that is. It's a random thing, like enjoy it on that day, right? Yeah. That's okay. And the other thing that you said that I see often too is people will come in and they will have eaten so well and done so much good work and incorporated green vegetables in each day. And they're drinking their water and they're doing so much good work. But yes, then they had, let's say, that cookie and they come in and they focus on, right, I can't believe I had that cookie. I can't believe that cookie. So even that negative energy on that one cookie versus I had greens every day. I had water. I drank all my water every day. I did that. So it's also shifting that mindset there too towards that. So anyway, this was amazing talking to both of you. Again, I'll say it for the 10th time. I'm so excited about this book. And thank you so much for sharing your incredible knowledge and insight with us today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity and all the people millions of people that you're helping. So I greatly appreciate that and the contribution that you're putting out from a nutrition world to everyone that needs it.
Oh, well, right back at both of you.
I echo that. Thank you very much, Keri. I really enjoyed it. And thanks for all the good work you do.
Thank you. And just another reminder to everybody, in the show notes, you'll find a link to the book and to more information about both of our wonderful guests, Ibrahim and Kristin.